March 5. Today, Monday, the jury was excused so we could hear an all-day admissibility hearing on testing the state was able to complete on the vial of blood found in the clerk of court's office, and compared that to samples recovered from the victim's SUV. Mark LeBeau, unit chief for the FBI's toxicology section in Virginia, had set aside his entire lab in January when he heard that police officers were being accused of planting blood in the case. The FBI developed a protocol for testing of EDTA, the preservative found in purple-topped blood tubes. The theory, of course, is that if the blood in the vial has EDTA, which it should, and the bloodstains recovered from the RAV4 do not have EDTA in them, which they shouldn't if they were the result of fresh, active bleeding, that will destroy the planting defense once and for all. Dr. LeBeau's results showed just that. The court ruled that the results were admissible to refute the defense suggestion of planting evidence. The judge rejected the defense request to do testing later themselves, since that would require a mistrial, and the judge pointed out that they gambled with this defense and they lost. So tomorrow, as the judge ruled, this evidence gets in.
This is John Lee for Gannett, Wisconsin Newspapers, outside the Calumet County Courthouse with an update on the Steven Avery trial. After he testified for 2 hours this morning, Dr. Mark LeBeau, the chief of the chemistry unit at the FBI lab in Quantico, Virginia, said he had determined that blood from an unsecured vial of Steven Avery's evidence was not used to plant blood spots and stains on Teresa Halbach's vehicle. But after 2 hours of testimony, LeBeau is now 3 hours into cross-examination by defense attorney Jerome Buting. He said the last time that EDTA test was used by the FBI was the 1995 O.J. Simpson trial.
So what I'm saying is your testimony today is that you don't know that scientists went back and looked after the O.J. case to try and explain, hey, why are we getting these EDTA results, and concluded it was probably carryover.
Well, you know, to be accurate about it, it was discovered in the middle of the trial. When the evidence was being presented in the case, there was a break over the weekend, and the scientist that was doing the work came back to Washington and did some additional tests and realized that what he was seeing as a very small blip of EDTA in the blood stain was actually instrument carryover from a previous sample.
But in defending the actions, protocols, and the new test results, he said, quote, there are completely different rules for labs now, and science also changes. Willis ruled toward the end of today's hearing, without the jury present, that LeBeau's testimony would be allowed tomorrow in front of the jury.
The judge has made a ruling. It's admissible evidence. I don't know what down the road this will hold, but the FBI now has a protocol in place for the testing of EDTA and bloodstains. And I suspect that in future cases of allegations of planting, whether they're the state requests it or the defense, and most of the times it's the defense requesting this type of testing on the in post-conviction motions. So I think from that standpoint, from the defense perspective and the prosecution perspective, this is helpful.
He also rejected defense claims for independent testing, saying that request came too late, since the defense knew about the blood vial last July and did not inform the court or prosecution until more than 4 months later.
The court also concludes that if the defendant had felt the testing of the blood was important, the defendant had adequate opportunity in which to arrange for such testing.
Willis also rejected the motion by the defense for a mistrial or a long-term continuance in the trial because of the new evidence.
This judge is the first judge who's ever ruled this kind of test to be admissible. when there's been no studies. You heard all the stuff today about the lack of peer review and how unusual it is that these kind of things even come up. So we view this as a Hail Mary pass by the state, that they feel their case was weak enough that they needed to take a chance to build a ready-made appeal issue into the case.
We'll be back Tuesday morning with more evidence and the return of the jury to start testimony again in week 4 of the Steven Avery homicide trial.
March 6th. After yesterday ruling the testimony of Dr. LeBeau would be admissible, today's testimony seemed just like deja vu all over again. Since we heard most of the questions and answers yesterday, today was a bit strange. Dr. LeBeau, however, did an equally good job explaining how EDTA is found, and not just in the environment, but how it acts in a blood vial as an anticoagulant and a preservative. The important part of the testimony is that EDTA is, in fact, in the blood vial, which was kept stored in the Manitowoc clerk's office, and it was not the source for the blood stains found in the victim's SUV. The cross-examination of Dr. LeBeau was very vigorous, often drawing comparisons to the O.J. Simpson trial and how the FBI screwed up the result of the EDTA testing in that case as they hurried to develop a testing protocol. This day also included Lynn Zygmunt, the Manitowoc Clerk of Court, who gave a brief history of Avery's 1985 case file and how a vial of blood ended up in their court. This was a big day for the prosecution to refute most of the defense case before they even put it in.
This is John Lee for Gannett, Wisconsin newspapers with an update on the Steven Avery homicide trial from the Calumet County Courthouse. Judge Patrick Willis is keeping the jury late Tuesday night after they had a long weekend. For the past 4 or more hours, FBI Chief Chemist Mark LeBeau has been under cross-examination by defense attorney Jerome Buting. LeBeau has already testified that bloodstains from Teresa Halbach's sport utility vehicle did not come from the unsecured vial of Steven Avery's blood that was found last summer in the Manitowoc County Courthouse.
And after all these different types of analyses that you performed, were you able to reach a conclusion concerning the presence of EDTA in the control swabs from Teresa Halbach's RAV4?
I was.
And what was that conclusion?
We were not able to identify any presence whatsoever of EDTA or the EDTA iron complex on the control swabs, any of the control swabs from the RAV4.
They are working late tonight, and LeBeau apparently is supposed to fly back toward Quantico, Virginia, so the judge is trying to get that testimony in before they wrap up. We've heard that testimony yesterday. There should be no surprises. Join us again tomorrow and click on Post-Crescent.com or wisinfo.com for updates from the Calumet County Courthouse.
March 7th. Today started with Rod Pevito, an arson investigator who has a great deal of experience in not only fire cases, but also those that include death, from not a great deal of burning to full incineration of a body. He explained the excavation of the burn area, provided expert testimony about heat produced by fires, and how bodies react to extreme heat. Mike Riddle, fingerprint examiner, testified as to mostly elimination of prints that were suitable for comparison, but most samples could not be identified. Todd Zimmerman, a telephone testimony expert today and technician for Singular Wireless, cleared up any of the misconceptions about the voicemail account of the victim and her messages were accessed after she was reported missing. If you recall, attorneys for the defense, actually Jerry Buting, intentionally misrepresented the evidence to Lori Shadry. I also recalled Mike Halbach, the victim's brother, to say he was the one that retrieved the messages from her phone. My last witness was lead investigator Mark Wiegert, who defended the decision he made on the case. Assuming all of the exhibits get into evidence, I informed the court today that the state rested. That's obviously a watershed moment in any trial, and it was nice to have all my T's crossed, allowing me to finish my part of the case. I will meet with the Halbach family tomorrow and explain how I believe the case is going. They seem okay with what they've seen so far.
This is John Lee for Gannett, Wisconsin newspapers with an update from the Steven Avery homicide trial in Chilton. Rodney Pevitil, an arson investigator and agent for the State Division of Criminal Investigation, is on the stand this morning explaining how he and other officers combed a burn pit behind Steven Avery's trailer on their hands and knees for the better part of a day, finding bone fragments and pieces of human tissue that were later identified as Teresa Halbach's. The state rested its case today after calling its 53rd witness, Sergeant Mark Wiegert, the Calumet County Sheriff's Department lead investigator. He tied down several things and put evidence together for the prosecution. The case moves to the defense case tomorrow. Judge Willis has given the jury off while other matters and motions are handled in court in the morning. For your information, this was Day 18 of testimony. 17 of those were heard by the jury. The 23rd day of the trial. Wiegert said the Calumet County report on this case totals 1,080 pages, with an estimated 600 to 800 pages from other agencies. To date, 496 exhibits have been entered into evidence in the trial. Click on Post-Crescent.com or wisinfo.com for frequent updates and analysis from the Avery homicide trial.
We've asked the defense for the same concessions and professionalism that we've given them, telling them each night who we plan to call the next day for their examination. The list they provided tonight included about 15 names, most of those who cannot possibly be called tomorrow. Right now, I have no confidence and especially have no respect for these two attorneys. Tomorrow morning, the defense will also move to dismiss count 4, the false imprisonment charge, which usually wouldn't be a concern, but given only circumstantial nature of the charges and needing the jury to make inferences from that circumstantial evidence may result in its dismissal. I think it's a close call, but for right now, I'm happy the state rested. March 8th. I met with the Halbach family this morning explaining what to expect in this morning and throughout the rest of the trial. Today would bring motions to dismiss after the state rested yesterday, and some other cleanup motions that the court had yet to decide. They seem very positive about the case. They're always very grateful for any feedback and time that I can give them between court sessions. The arguments in the morning session were very contentious, with an extra dose of angst seamlessly thrown in towards me personally and the early press conferences that I had given. Any shot they can take at the prosecution, these two attorneys seem to enjoy. For whatever reason, I was feeling low today, partly because I'm worried about the false imprisonment charge surviving, since that count is almost entirely circumstantial and requires the court and the jury to make inferences about that which happened to Teresa. But I may also just be exhausted from 4 straight weeks of presenting the murder case, which is by far the longest trial I've had so far in my career. Other motions included a renewal of a complaint about multiple executions of the search warrants and complaint about crime lab testing and contamination of the results. The afternoon brought the first defense witness, which I incorrectly predicted would start strong. Lisa Buckner, a bus driver, said she saw a woman taking pictures of some van but didn't recall the date and placed the photos far away from the actual spot of the defendant's house. Some guy was called to say that he saw an SUV leave the Avery property sometime the afternoon of October 31st, but he failed to ID it as the victim's SUV. Raleigh Johnson testified that he owned the trailer that Steve was living in, he owned the .22 rifle, the murder weapon, which was hanging over Avery's bed, had shot that gun a lot, and generally what his property looked like. Nothing earth-shaking from Raleigh Johnson. So a very slow start. The defense in chambers after the day's session refused to identify any of their experts that they plan to call tomorrow. Again, a courtesy that we've given them for over 4 weeks now. The defense team now seems very frustrated and angry with how the trial is going. All we can do is continue to be professional and try not to let their antics get to us.
This is John Lee for Gannett, Wisconsin newspapers with an update on the Steven Avery homicide trial from outside the Calumet County Courthouse. Defense Attorney Dean Strang made a routine motion this morning asking Judge Willis to order a directed verdict or acquittal of Steven Avery, claiming the defense has not met its burden of proof in the case they rested yesterday. He is centering his motion on what he claims is a lack of evidence on the false imprisonment charge and the lack of any evidence on where and how Teresa Halbach died. Special Prosecutor Ken Kratz said that his theory is that Teresa Halbach died in the garage of a gunshot wound where the bullet was found the March after the arrest of Avery. Kratz also told Judge Willis that jurors will be told to use common sense and reasonable inference when they deliberate on these charges. The defense started calling witnesses this afternoon. The first 3 witnesses did not say anything too earth-shaking, but they are laying a foundation the defense hope leads to some doubt. Lisa Buchner, a Michigan school bus driver, said she thought she saw Teresa Halbach taking a photo of the van between 3:30 and 3:40 p.m. October 31st, 2005. John Lerquin, a propane driver for Valders Co-op, whose bulk plant is next to the Avery salvage yard, said he saw a sport utility vehicle that may have matched the description of Halbach's leaving the salvage yard, but said under cross-examination that he was not sure if it was Halbach or if it was her vehicle. The third witness was a Roland Johnson, who owns the trailer and garage that Steven Avery lives in. The final witness was Manitowoc County Coroner Deborah Kakich, and eventually Judge Willis ruled that her testimony was not relevant to the case. Defense attorneys were trying to show that she was not allowed to participate in the case, a decision made by the Manitowoc County Executive and the Manitowoc County Corporation Council that Kakich apparently disagreed with.
But at any rate, whether they made the right decision or the wrong decision, it seems to me it was based on the effort of some higher officials in Manitowoc County not to create or further, if you will, from the defense perspective, the appearance of a conflict of interest. And I don't perceive how pulling a Manitowoc County person off would somehow add to any bias on any part. when the purpose for making the decision was to avoid the creation of bias. And whether that's right or wrong, the probative value of that decision is so minimal to the facts in this case, which is a criminal case, that I don't believe the evidence has much probative value. And for that reason, the court is not going to allow it. I believe it would tend to confuse the issues in this case.
The defense will continue its case Friday. Remember to click on Post-Crescent.com, wisinfo.com, or your local Gannett community newspaper for updates from the Steven Avery homicide trial.
March 9th. The second day of the defense case, they called 2 experts. Due to their change in attitude, it wasn't until we were literally walking into court that we learned the identity of their chemist. A woman from New Mexico named Janine Arvizu, who had done some quality assurance work both at private labs and also for the Navy. This woman criticized the fast development of the FBI protocol, which allowed the EDTA testing to be done. Eventually rendered the opinion that although the FBI test could detect the presence of EDTA, as in the vial of blood at the Manitowoc Clerk of Court's office, because of problems in detection limits, she testified the test told the jury nothing about the absence of EDTA in the dried blood stain in the SUV. In other words, her opinion was that EDTA was in the purple top tube, just as you might expect, but that the blood in the SUV, determined to be that of Steven Avery, may or may not have had EDTA in it, and the FBI's conclusion that the blood must have been the result of active bleeding from the defendant was not necessarily accurate. Norm Gahn's cross-examination was very, very good for having no prep time. I'd hoped we would have known more about the woman and could have researched her and other cases that she may have testified in. The afternoon expert was Dr. Scott Fairgrieve, a forensic anthropologist from Canada who was testifying for the first time in the United States, also for the first time for the defense in any case. He works for a university, trains cops on cremated remain recovery, and was generally an honest man and a good expert witness. He agreed with many points made by the state's anthropologist, which would be a good trial tactic for him to do, including identification of a female, adult bone fragments from one person, and that she had 2 bullet holes in her skull. The points of disagreement came on manner and cause of death, homicide, or gunshot to the head, as that decision should be left to a forensic pathologist. The most disagreement came on the opinion of the primary burn site, which the state's anthropologist, Dr. Eisenberg, said was behind the garage of Steven Avery. Dr. Fairgrieve, however, said it could not be determined, as bones had been moved in the case, and he'd seen bones moved to what looks like a burn location rather than from that location. I didn't know if it will have any impact on the jury decision or not, but the battle of experts is always an interesting part of any criminal trial.
This is John Lee for Gannett, Wisconsin newspapers with a Friday update up from outside the Steven Avery homicide trial in Calumet County. Janine Arvizu, an independent lab auditor from New Mexico, is the 5th witness called by the defense in the Steven Avery trial. She is trying to disprove samples that were testified on extensively earlier this week by FBI chemist Mark LeBeau, who said that blood stains from Steven Avery on Teresa Halbach's vehicle did not contain the preservative EDTA, disallowing the fact that that blood may have come from an unsecured vial that was found last summer in the Manitowoc County Clerk's office. The defense called its sixth witness this afternoon, Dr. Scott Fairgrieve, chairman of the Department of Forensic Science at Laurentian College in Ontario, Canada. He is also a forensic anthropologist, as was Dr. Leslie Eisenberg, the prosecution's witness last week. He is testifying that he disagrees with the findings from Dr. Eisenberg that Teresa Halbach was shot twice in the head and killed. He said he cannot say for sure that the gunshot wounds caused her death or were made after her death. He can only say that the wounds came somewhere around the time of her death. He remains on the stand under cross-examination by Special Prosecutor Tom Fallon and will probably go most of the rest of this afternoon. The defense said they will not rest their case until after Judge Willis's rulings at 8:30 Monday on several motions that are pending. Those motions will affect jury instructions, but the parties expect that those jury instructions would follow closing arguments and that final stage of the trial could begin as soon as Tuesday. The defense is nearing the end of its case, calling Calumet County Sheriff's Department Sergeant Mark Weger to tie up a few loose ends this afternoon. He was the seventh witness in the case. The judge dismissed the jury about 45 minutes early with the normal instructions to avoid media reports or any discussions of the trial, but he also told them that before they begin deliberations, they may be again questioned to see if they have avoided that for the entire 5 weeks of this trial. Judge Willis is due to make some rulings at 8:30 Monday. The jury is due back at 9, and we expect the defense will be resting sometime Monday. This case could go to a jury by Tuesday. Stay tuned and click on Post-Crescent.com or your local Gannett, Wisconsin newspaper for updates next week as the jury deliberates the fate of Steven Avery.